How do you face a danger that threatens to erase your very existence? And what happens when the only person who can stop a genocide is a young woman trapped by palace protocol? This is the story of Esther, not merely a fairy tale of rags to riches, but a profound narrative of divine strategy and moral courage. Our story begins in the sprawling Persian Empire, under the powerful, often impulsive, King Xerxes. Esther, known by her Hebrew name Hadassah, was a Jewish girl living in Susa, far from her ancestral home. Orphaned, she was raised by her cousin and mentor Mordecai, who instilled in her a deep sense of faith and caution. When King Xerxes suddenly deposed his queen, a nationwide search commenced for the most beautiful young women. Esther was chosen, her grace and quiet wisdom quickly earning her favor. This sudden rise to royalty was no accident. Mordecai, ever vigilant, instructed Esther to keep her Jewish heritage a secret, a piece of advice that would become the cornerstone of her people's survival. Even before the major crisis, Mordecai demonstrated his loyalty by uncovering and reporting an assassination plot against the king. This selfless act, recorded quietly in the royal chronicles, was the first subtle clue. Esther and her cousin were exactly where they needed to be placed by Providence, for a purpose neither of them yet understood. The air within the royal court was thick with the scent of entitlement, all emanating from Haman. Drunk on his newly acquired power, this highly placed official saw the Persian world as his stage, and every subject as a mere prop. Yet there stood a stubborn anomaly, Mordecai, the queen's cousin. Mordecai understood that true power belonged to a higher source. His simple, principled refusal to bend the knee was more than an insult. It was a pinprick that threatened to deflate Haman's fragile ego. The fury that erupted within Haman was irrational and boundless. To punish only Mordecai was too pedestrian for his vengeance. Haman's toxic pride demanded a maximalist response. If one Jew dared to defy him, then all Jews must be purged. He concocted a plot of chilling systemic evil, presenting King Xerxes with a masterful blend of slander and calculated flattery. Haman convinced the king that the Jewish people, with their different laws and customs, were a cancerous anomaly, a threat to imperial uniformity that needed to be removed. The true horror lay in the terrifying ease of the transaction. Xerxes, too distracted by imperial comforts and too reliant on his advisor, gave Haman the signet ring with a gesture of ultimate tragic apathy. He wasn't signing a death warrant. He was signing off on a tedious administrative issue. Haman then utilized the pur, the random casting of lots, to pick the day, adding an element of cruel bureaucratic chance to the genocide. The speed with which the edict traveled was breathtaking. Horsemen thundered across 127 provinces, delivering the news that turned the vibrant life of the empire instantly to ash. From the bustling ports to the distant outposts, a collective crushing despair descended. Parents hugged their children, knowing their fate was sealed by a scrap of parchment and a king's boredom. Mordecai, draped in symbols of absolute ruin, stood at the palace gates, sending a message that resonated deeper than fear. The queen was in a sanctuary built on sand. The luxurious palace, once her protection, now represented the last perilous frontier between utter annihilation and the possibility of a miracle. The panic in Esther's heart was amplified by the echo of the palace's vast empty halls. Though she slept on silk and wore the royal crown, she was utterly powerless. The king's decree was law, and the law of the Medes and Persians was immutable. Her situation was cruelly unique. To step into the inner court without an invitation was to willingly walk toward the executioner. The king's golden scepter, the only object that could save her, was a gamble no one dared to take. Adding to her terror was the agonizing fact that it had been 30 days since Xerxes had summoned her. 30 days of regal silence, a chasm of indifference that suggested her favor had already been revoked. The odds of her survival were virtually zero. When Mordecai's message reached her, it contained a chilling, undeniable truth. Her privilege was a myth. His words were a prophetic ultimatum, Do not fool yourself into thinking that just because you are queen, the hand of genocide will somehow pass you by. It will not. If you remain silent now, if you choose comfort over courage, deliverance will certainly arise for our people from another, perhaps harsher place. But you and your royal house will be wiped out. Then came the voice of destiny delivered through her cousin's challenge. That single life-altering question pierced the soul of the queen. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? It was a mandate from Providence itself. Esther realized her crown wasn't a prize. It was a sacred responsibility, a tool forged by God for this impossible moment. The fear didn't vanish, but it was overshadowed by fierce spiritual clarity. Her response was not a negotiation, but a declaration of war against despair. She didn't rely solely on her beauty or political cunning. She demanded a collective spiritual mobilization. Go gather the Jewish people in Susa. For 3 days, let them neither eat nor drink. My maids and I will do the same. She was uniting the fate of the palace with the fate of the people. Then came her stunning act of defiance. If I perish, I perish. Having survived the initial risk, Queen Esther launched her ingenious strategy. At the first intimate banquet, she refused to make her ultimate plea, instead creating suspense by inviting the king and Haman back for a second gathering the following day. Haman left the feast brimming with toxic pride, convinced he was the most favored man in the empire. He failed to notice the subtle anxiety in the queen's demeanor. That night the universe shifted. King Xerxes, agitated and unable to find rest, ordered the dull, dusty royal chronicles to be read to him. In this most mundane of administrative acts, Providence intervened. The reader came upon the long-forgotten entry, Mordecai's loyalty in saving the king's life. Xerxes, appalled by the lapse, immediately demanded to know the reward Mordecai had received. The answer, none. At that precise moment, Haman arrived, seeking to hang Mordecai before breakfast. Xerxes summoned him. Haman strutted in his heart, pounding with anticipation of glory. The king's question was devastatingly simple. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman, consumed by his own image, described a royal parade robes and the king's own horse, certain the honor was his. Then came the crushing command. Go at once and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew. Haman's triumphant dream inverted into a humiliating nightmare. He was forced to laud his despised rival through the city streets. The final scene unfolded at the second banquet. Esther, composed yet fierce, pointed her finger at Haman and delivered the devastating truth. She was a Jew, and this man now sitting beside the king was a murderer who had purchased her life and the lives of her people. Xerxes exploded in regal rage. He realized he had been duped into signing his queen's death warrant. Haman, utterly broken, fell prostrate at Esther's feet, begging for mercy. When the king returned and saw Haman's posture, he misinterpreted it as assault. The verdict was sealed. The same Haman, who had gloated over his 75-foot gallows, became its first and final victim. Justice, guided by the silent hand of destiny, had been served with ultimate dramatic irony. Despite Haman's execution, the threat remained. The Persian legal system held that a decree sealed by the king could never be revoked. The death warrant, Haman's master plan, still stood signed by Xerxes himself. Esther had saved her life and exposed the villain, but the law mandated the annihilation of her people. The crisis shifted from a battle against a man to a battle against an irreversible law. Once more, Esther knelt before the king, not as queen demanding vengeance, but as advocate for the powerless. Xerxes, now completely devoted to her, granted Mordecai authority to issue a counter-decree. This political genius didn't overturn the original edict. Instead, it granted Jewish communities the right to defend themselves. Fear was replaced by resolve. The new law sped across the empire on swift horses, arming the people with hope. When the dreadful day arrived, It was not the destruction Haman had planned, but a dawn of victory. Across 127 provinces, the Jewish people stood united, defending their families. The plotters became the casualties. Mordecai, now second in power to the king, secured peace and protection for his people. The hand of destiny turned a bureaucratic death sentence into a national rebirth. To ensure this turnaround was never forgotten, Esther and Mordecai established Purim, named after the poor, the lot Haman had cast. The festival celebrates divine irony. It is a day of feasting, joy, and gifts, a ritual reminder that even in the darkest moment, we must never lose faith. Esther's legacy is not her crown, but her courage, reminding us that we are placed in our spheres of influence for such a time as this.